The Wyoming sun beat down on the cracked earth, hot enough to bake hope right out of a soul. Sarah McKenna stood in the doorway of what had once been her home. The ranch house, with its sagging roof and broken shutters, looked as defeated as she felt. 3 days had passed since Thomas left, taking every bit of value and leaving only debt and ruin behind. "Sign here," he had said, his voice cold as a January wind. The papers had trembled in her hands. With that one signature, most of their ancestral land her grandfather had claimed with sweat and blood, would be sold to pay for Thomas's failed investments back east. All that remained was this broken-down house and 40 acres of dust. Inside, the parlor was a hollow echo of her mother's laughter. The furniture was gone, the walls bare, the memories too loud. Outside, 5 sickly cattle wandered the dead pasture, ribs showing like hunger itself. When Sarah worked the well pump, it groaned and spat only rust-colored water. Her cousin Martha had begged her to leave. "You should come stay with us. No proper woman lives alone out here." Sarah had looked her straight in the eye. "Then I suppose I'll have to become improper," the town whispered. In the general store, in church, in the street. "Poor thing," she overheard. "Thomas McKenna left her with nothing but shame and debt. She'll be selling herself in Cheyenne before winter." But Sarah held her head high. She bought her sack of cornmeal, her salt, a few bullets for her father's rifle, and walked back to her empty kingdom. The first weeks tested her to the bone. The roof leaked when the spring storm came. She used every pot and bucket to catch the dripping water. Coyotes took her chickens one by one until only 2 remained. She learned to set snares, to stretch flour into meals that barely filled her stomach. Her hands grew rough and cracked, her face browned by wind and work. Some nights she lay awake, listening to the wolves crying out in the dark, and wondered if Thomas had been right, if she was a fool to stay. But when dawn painted the mountains purple and gold, she remembered why this land mattered. Her grandfather had driven cattle across 1,000 miles to claim this soil. Her father had built the cabin with his own hands. This was McKenna land, and she would die before letting it go. It was on one of those scorching afternoons that she first saw the stranger. Sarah was checking her traps by the creek when she heard a low groan. It wasn't an animal sound. It was human, hurt. She followed it through the cottonwoods and found him slumped against a boulder, his shirt soaked with blood. His horse was gone. A revolver lay in the dirt beside him. Her first thought was to run. Trouble came easy in these parts, and wounded men usually meant more of it close behind. But then his eyes opened, gray as storm clouds, and he tried to speak. "Please." Sarah hesitated only a moment before kneeling beside him. The wound in his side was bad, but clean. The bullet had gone through. She pressed her hand against it, feeling the warmth of his blood on her skin. "Who shot you?" He shook his head weakly. "Doesn't matter, they're gone." It did matter, but she didn't ask again. She couldn't lift him alone, so she tore her petticoat and made a makeshift drag. 2 long hours later, she hauled him into the old tack room and nearly collapsed beside him. She cleaned his wound with the last of her whiskey, packed it with cloth, and prayed it wouldn't turn. For 3 days he drifted between life and death. She fed him weak broth, changed his bandages, and wondered what kind of trouble she had brought home. When he finally woke, she was stirring mush over the stove. "Don't move," she said without turning. "You'll tear your stitches." "Stitches?" His voice was rough. "You sew?" "You're lucky I learned more than embroidery." He watched her for a long moment. "Why'd you help me?" Sarah looked at him then, at the scars and the shadows in his face. "Because I know what it's like to be left for dead." He studied her a moment, then nodded. "Jack?" he said. "Name's Jack." "Sarah." She handed him a bowl of mush. "Eat slow!" Jack told her he was a bounty hunter, shot by a man named Coulter near Devil's Canyon. He didn't say why, and Sarah didn't ask. In Wyoming, sometimes not knowing was safer. As he healed, they fell into a rhythm. Jack fixed what he could: the pump handle, the leaky roof, the corral gate that never closed right. He had a quiet way about him, and the cattle seemed calmer when he was near. They didn't talk much at first, but over shared meals of rabbit stew and wild greens, conversation came easier. Jack spoke of tracking outlaws under endless skies. Sarah told him about her father, about dreams of raising horses, about everything except Thomas. One evening they sat on the porch, watching thunderheads roll over the mountains. "You live out here alone?" Jack asked. "Yes." "Dangerous for a woman." "It's dangerous for anyone," she said. "I manage." He smiled faintly. "You're tougher than most men I've known." Sarah looked at him then, the stormlight in his eyes, the tired set of his shoulders. "We're all tough until we're not," she said softly. That night, the rain came hard. The roof leaked again, forcing Sarah to drag her bed to the driest corner. She heard Jack moving in the tack room, then his knock on her door. "Your roof's worse than mine," he said. The kitchen's still dry. They sat by the stove till dawn, the firelight flickering between them. She studied his hands, the scars, the stillness. "This place means everything to you," he said quietly. "It's all I have left." Quote, "No," he said. "It's who you are." When the storm broke and sunlight returned, Sarah stepped outside and saw Jack at the pump, working the handle with slow, steady strength. For the first time since Thomas had left, she didn't feel entirely alone. The morning ritual of changing Jack's bandages had become strangely intimate. Each day, Sarah would bring fresh cloth and what little carbolic she had left. Jack would quietly unbutton his shirt, the fabric stiff with dried blood, revealing the angry red wound that was slowly turning to a scar. "It's healing well," she said, her fingers steady even as her pulse wasn't. He smiled faintly. "That's thanks to you." "Hold still," she warned, though he hadn't moved. The small room felt warmer than it should have. Over the following weeks, Jack proved himself in ways Sarah never expected. He reinforced the chicken coop, patched the roof, and somehow coaxed the half-starved cattle to graze again. He even built a new corral gate from scrap lumber, sturdy and straight as a soldier. "You should have been a carpenter," Sarah said one morning. "My father was," Jack replied, testing the new latch. "Taught me that a man ought to know how to build as well as tear down." "What made you choose the tearing down part?" He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes the world doesn't give you much choice." That afternoon, she found him working in the barn, cutting wood with her father's tools. "What are you building now?" she asked. He smiled without looking up. "Something you might like." For the first time in months, the sound of hammering felt like hope. That evening brought another storm, steady and soaking, not wild like the last. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the rain tapping on the patched roof. Jack suddenly spoke, his voice low. "I killed a boy once, not on purpose. He was with Coulter's gang, couldn't have been more than 16. Sarah's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Jack stared into the fire. "When the shooting started, I thought he had a gun. It was a letter from his sweetheart. I found it later in his pocket." He exhaled slowly. "Been trying to quit bounty hunting ever since, but some stains don't wash off." Sarah set her bowl down. "We all have blood on our hands one way or another," she said softly. "The question is what we do after." Jack glanced at her. "Is that what you tell yourself about your husband?" "Ex-husband," she corrected. "And no, I tell myself I survived him." For a long time, neither spoke. The rain kept falling, steady as confession. Finally, Jack said, "He was a fool to leave you." Sarah looked up sharply. "Or I was, for believing in him." Jack's voice was rough. "No, any man who could walk away from a woman like you never deserved you." Thunder cracked close outside. Sarah rose abruptly. "I should check the stock before the fence washes out." She grabbed her coat and stepped into the rain, not caring that it soaked her to the bone. She needed air, distance. When she finally returned, dripping and cold, Jack had banked the fire low. He looked up, searching her face, but said nothing. The silence between them stretched thin, humming like the air before lightning. The next day passed awkwardly. They spoke only of chores, the weather, the cattle. But by afternoon, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. 3 riders, moving fast. "Visitors?" Jack asked, already reaching for his revolver. Sarah's stomach tightened. "We don't get many." When they pulled up to the gate, she recognized the man in front, Sheriff Watson. He'd known her since she was a child. Behind him rode two deputies she didn't recognize. "Miss McKenna," the sheriff greeted, deliberately avoiding her married name. "Heard you might have company out here." His eyes flicked to Jack. "I help travelers when they're in need," Sarah said evenly. "It's what good neighbors do." The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "This particular traveler wouldn't happen to be Jack Dalton, would he?" Jack didn't flinch. "Depends who's asking." "The law," the sheriff said. "You're wanted for questioning in the death of Brett Coulter. His family's been making noise back east." Jack met the sheriff's gaze steadily. "Coulter drew first." "I just finished it." "Maybe so, but the judge wants to hear about it proper. I'd advise you come in voluntary-like before I've got to fetch you." Sarah stepped forward, chin lifted. "Sheriff, this man's been recovering here, doing honest work. He's no criminal." "Sarah," the sheriff said gently, "you don't want to get tangled in this." "I already am," she shot back. "If you want to question him, you can do it right here." One deputy sneered. "Harboring a fugitive's a crime, ma'am." "He's not a fugitive if he hasn't been charged," Sarah retorted. "Or did I miss the part where justice stopped meaning something in Wyoming?" The sheriff raised a hand, silencing his deputy. "Nobody's getting arrested today. But Dalton, you come to town in a few days. Tell your story straight. Might save everyone some grief." "I'll consider it," Jack said. When they rode off, Sarah realized her hands were shaking. Jack touched her arm lightly. "You shouldn't have done that. They had no right to threaten you. They had every right. You don't need my kind of trouble." "Too late," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You're already here." That night, another storm rolled in. Rain hammered the roof like angry fists. Sarah lay awake listening to it when the door opened softly. Jack stood there, dripping from a leak in the tack room roof. "Mind if I sleep by the stove? It's dry in here." She hesitated. Then, "Get in before you catch your death." He spread a blanket on the floor, but Sarah's voice stopped him. "Jack," she said quietly, "the bed's big enough." He hesitated. "Sarah." "Just sleep," she said. "It's been a long day." He lay beside her, fully clothed, careful not to touch. But the nearness of him filled the dark room with something fierce and unspoken. "Tell me about Missouri," she murmured. "Not much to tell. Had a small farm, corn and hogs, lost it after the war." "And your family?" "My sister moved west. Haven't seen her in years." He paused. "What about you? Why did Thomas leave?" Sarah stared at the ceiling. "Because I couldn't give him children. 3 years of trying, nothing. He wanted heirs, not a wife. He found some young girl who could." Her voice cracked. 17, I heard. Pregnant already." Jack reached for her hand in the dark. "He's the fool, not you." She didn't pull away. Their fingers laced together, a quiet promise neither dared to speak aloud. When dawn came, Sarah woke to find their hands still joined. Jack was watching the sunrise through the window. "Whatever you're building in that barn," she said softly, "I hope it's almost done." "Almost," he said, smiling. 2 mornings later, as they saddled the horses for the ride to town, Jack looked at her, his voice low but steady. "I'm done running, Sarah." She met his eyes. "Good." "Because I'm done being afraid." Quote. The ride to town took 2 long hours under a cloudless sky. Sarah kept her back straight and her chin high, refusing to let the stares or whispers shake her. Jack rode close beside her, calm but alert, one hand always near his hip. When they reached Main Street, everything stopped. The blacksmith's hammer, the gossip on the porch, even the horses seemed to sense something was about to happen. Sheriff Watson waited by the jailhouse steps, hat in hand. "Dalton, Miss McKenna." "Sheriff," Jack said. "Come on in. Best settle this quiet." Inside, the office smelled of dust and coffee. The sheriff listened carefully as Jack told his story. How he'd tracked Coulter's gang across the territories. How the boy had fired first. How Jack had walked away with a bullet in his side in a lifetime of regret. When he finished, the sheriff leaned back. Coulter's kin are loud but not fools. From what I can tell, this was self-defense. My report'll say so. Appreciate it, Jack said. Just stay put a while. Let things cool off. Outside, the sunlight felt brighter, the air lighter. Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. Told you honesty beats running. Jack grinned. Remind me to argue with you less. They went to the general store for supplies, drawing stares as they entered. Mrs. Henderson was there, of course, sharp-eyed and ready to slice with words. Why, Sarah McKenna, she said loudly. Heard you've taken in a boarder. Sarah met her gaze. Yes, Mrs. Henderson. He's been helping me fix the ranch. Is that what they call it now? The store went quiet. Sarah straightened. If you've got something to say it plain. Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Well, I never. No, Sarah said softly, you never had to. She turned to the clerk. 10 pounds of flour, 5 of coffee, and a tin of peaches if you've got them. Jack leaned close, smiling. Peaches? Felt like something sweet. They were just loading the wagon when a familiar voice froze Sarah in place. Well, well. If it isn't my dear ex-wife. Thomas McKenna stood on the boardwalk, dressed in fine clothes and arrogance. A young, pregnant girl clung to his arm. His eyes flicked over Sarah's worn dress, the dust on her boots, the man beside her. Thomas, she said evenly, you look prosperous. Business has been good, he said. Railroad investments. You should have stayed, Sarah. Could have shared in it. I did share, she replied, in the debts, the shame, and the ruin you left behind. Jack stepped closer, his presence solid and quiet. You're blocking the way, friend. Thomas's eyes narrowed. And you are? Jack Dalton, her partner. In what exactly? Thomas sneered. Sarah smiled. In everything that matters. Thomas's face darkened, but with the whole town watching, he forced a smirk and tipped his hat. Good day, Miss McKenna. He stalked off, dragging his young wife with him. Sarah's hands trembled as she loaded the last crate. Jack touched her arm gently. You all right? She nodded. Better than I ever was. The next week, Thomas returned, this time with 2 hired men and a slick lawyer. Sarah and Jack were fixing the corral when they saw the riders coming up the road. Stay inside, Jack said. No, Sarah said firmly. This is my land. Thomas dismounted, the lawyer handing her a paper. Seems there's a small irregularity in our divorce, darling. The water rights to Willow Creek were never properly signed over. Legally, they still belong to me. Sarah read the paper, then tore it clean in half. No, Thomas, those rights belong to this land, and to me. Be reasonable, he snapped. Sell them to me. I'll pay fair. Fair? She repeated. You don't know the meaning of the word. One of his men stepped forward, hand near his gun. Jack moved faster, drawing his revolver smooth as breath. That's close enough. The tension was thick as smoke until Sheriff Watson appeared, riding hard with 2 deputies. Morning, the sheriff called. Something wrong here? Thomas forced a smile. Just business. Then do it in town, the sheriff said, and take your hired help with you. I won't have trouble on McKenna land. Thomas's jaw worked, but he swung into the saddle. This isn't over. No, Sarah said. It's just beginning. But you won't like how it ends. Quote. When they were gone, she sagged against the porch rail. Jack holstered his gun and gathered her close. He'll be back, she whispered. Let him come, Jack said. This time, we'll be ready. Ready came sooner than either expected. 2 nights later, fire lit the sky. The barn was burning. Sarah ran barefoot across the yard, choking on smoke, while Jack fought to free the terrified horses. Together they saved most of them, but the old mare her father had given her was lost. When the flames died, only black ruin remained. The sheriff's men found no evidence. Could have been lightning, he said. Or a coward, Jack growled. That night, Sarah sat on the porch, face streaked with ash. He won't stop, Jack. Not till he takes everything. Jack knelt before her, taking her hands. Then we stop him first. They set a trap. Jack rode into town alone, loud about heading to Cheyenne for work. That night, Thomas's men came, just as he expected. But Sheriff Watson and 2 deputies were waiting in the dark. Gunfire split the night, short and sharp. When it ended, 2 men were in irons, and one confessed everything. Thomas had paid them to burn her out. By morning, word spread. Thomas McKenna had fled the territory, wanted for arson and conspiracy. Sarah stood on the porch as Jack rode back, his arm bandaged from a grazing shot. "You reckless fool," she scolded, tears in her eyes. "Worth it," he said softly. "He's gone, Sarah, for good." Weeks later, when the townsfolk came to help rebuild the barn, Sarah realized something had changed. Men and women who once whispered now worked beside her, bringing lumber, tools, and food. Mrs. Henderson even brought cloth for curtains. "Looks like the valley finally remembered what community means," Jack said, hammer in hand. "Maybe they just needed someone to remind them," Sarah replied. The new barn rose stronger than the old one. So did Sarah. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold ring. "Sarah McKenna, will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears. "You sure you want a scandalous woman with a burned barn and more debts than cattle?" He smiled. "I want the strongest, wildest woman I've ever known." She kissed him hard enough to silence the past. Then yes. 2 years later, the Dalton Ranch thrived. Where ash once lay, green pastures stretched wide. The cattle were healthy, the garden full, the well deep and clear. Sarah stood on her porch, a baby girl cradled in her arms, watching Jack and old Frank mend the fence under the warm Wyoming sun. "Elizabeth," she whispered to the child, "you were born from dust and fire. Never forget, you come from fighters." As the wind moved through the cottonwoods her father had planted, Sarah thought of the journey that had brought her here, from shame and ruin to strength and home. Somewhere far away, Thomas would still be scheming. But it didn't matter. He had mocked the broken ranch once. Now that same ranch stood taller, richer, and wilder than ever, and so did she. The Dalton Ranch glowed gold in the fading light, a living monument to everything love and grit could build. Sarah leaned into Jack's shoulder as the sky turned red. "Home," she said softly. "Always," he answered. And the wind carried their laughter across the valley, mingling with the low hum of cattle and the promise of a new dawn.